Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm honored to rise in this House and speak in opposition to Bill C-6, an act to implement the Convention on Cluster Munitions. And Mr. Speaker, I want to begin today by making it clear that history will note that on such a critical issue, on this debate, that we haven't seen one government member rise and make a speech in defense of an undefensible bill. And we hear, and in fact I'm being heckled right now by speakers that reject this notion. But we know very clearly that tonight it's New Democrat member after New Democrat member that has the courage to stand in this House and call this bill for what it is. A bill that has, that certainly where we see this government trying to hide an ugly agenda, where a gaping loophole exists that would allow Canadians, soldiers, that would allow Canada to be able to sit by and in fact work with countries that kill civilians through the use of cluster munitions. And Mr. Speaker, there's no surprise the Conservatives have often have real issues in digesting factual information. But just to be clear, and I know this fact has been repeated on numerous occasions tonight, 98% of all recorded cluster munition casualties have been civilians. 98%. We know that the bomblets coming out of cluster munitions are small, often the size of a battery or a tennis ball, and have a failure rate of up to 30%. Unexploded bomblets, as they're called, become de facto landmines. One cluster bomb contains hundreds of these sub-munitions and typically scatters them across an area the size of 2 to 4 football fields. And up to 37 countries and territories may be affected by cluster munitions from use in armed conflict. 19 countries have used cluster munitions in combat, and 34 countries have at one point produced the weapons, though half of these have since ended production, some as a result of the convention. Mr. Speaker, we know in 2006, 22 Canadian Forces members were killed and 112 wounded in Afghanistan as a result of landmines, cluster bombs, and other explosive devices. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this House, we've been able to bring forward the voices of internationally respected figures that oppose Canada's position. And I want to also quote the former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Fraser, who testifying in the parliamentary committee said, quote, "If you want to kill women and children, cluster bombs are the weapons of choice," unquote. He urged Canada not to enable Canadian soldiers to use cluster bombs in joint operations with the U.S. military. And Mr. Speaker, as a result of Clause 11 in this bill, we know that that's exactly the loophole that exists, that Canada is now embarking, as a result of this bill, on a journey that would see us collaborate with countries that use cluster bombs and as a result cause incredible civilian casualties, take away the lives of innocent people in civilians in countries around the world, and all of this for what, Mr. Speaker? I mean, there are many days in this House where one wonders what this government's foreign affairs agenda actually is. We know that there have been deep cuts to our international development commitments. We know that at every step along the way, this government has sought to prioritize its corporate agenda, assigning top advisory positions to corporate figures in the mining industry and the resource extractive industry that have incredible sway over our international aid and international development dollars. We know that Canada now houses about 75% of the mining companies around the world. And sadly, some of these mining companies, many of them in fact, many of which don't have even production here in Canada, actually are complicit in human rights abuses around this world. Many of them benefit of the services given to them by by embassies, Canadian embassies. Some benefit from actual investment through Export Development Canada. And many carry the reputation that as Canadian mining companies, somehow they are working to make the world a better place. We know that Canada now houses about 75% of the mining companies around the world. And sadly, some of these mining companies, many of them in fact, many of which don't have even production here in Canada, actually are complicit in human rights abuses around this world. Many of them benefit of the services given to them by embassies, Canadian embassies. Some benefit from actual investment through Export Development Canada. And many carry the reputation that as Canadian mining companies, somehow they are working to make the world a better place. While in fact we know in country after country, particularly in Latin America and Africa, all that is happening is Canada is getting a bad name. And Mr. Speaker, this bill is no different. This bill serves to sully the reputation of Canada, a country that for years had built a strong reputation when it came to banning landmines, when it came to commitments to peacekeeping, when it came to commitments under its foreign affairs agenda explicitly to human security. And these didn't come just because they were ideas of one person, although certainly we think of a former Prime Minister like Lester Pearson and others who were very much responsible of the vision of peacekeeping. These came as a result, these touchstones emerged as a result of Canadians' values, of the push that Canadians made day in and day out, activists that fought for nuclear disarmament, activists that fought for peace, activists that fought for solidarity, to make sure that Canada is actually contributing to the well-being of people around the world. And Mr. Speaker, Canadians are horrified and will be horrified to hear of the bill that this government is ramming through Parliament. A bill that throws out the kind of reputation that Canadians value, and a bill that would ensure that Canada collaborates with countries that know the technology they're using, that know the arms that they are using, kill civilians in what they do. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's surprising that this government or these members of Parliament that sit across have seem to not be concerned by any of this. I mean, first of all, we can see from the fact that none of them are actually rising tonight to make a speech on this issue. They seem to think that their best contribution is through heckling in this House. My question is, what kind of discussion could they possibly have, or what kind of defense could they possibly have to share with their constituents that would wonder why their member of Parliament their member of Parliament sitting on the government side is complicit in ensuring that an agenda that will see civilians die is rammed through Parliament without their contribution in debate, but obviously with their full support as they vote for debate to be hurried through and this bill to become legislation. Mr. Speaker, I share the feeling of frankly shame that Canada will now be a country as a result of this bill that includes Clause 11 that will be complicit in these kinds of horrors. And I would say that let history document that government members, that this Conservative government actively pursued an agenda that does not improve the lives of people around the world, that actively obstructs those, including our former allies and voices that have worked along with Canada in disarmament and the ban of landmines, and a government that is trying so with such great gusto to reconfigure a representation of a country that no Canadian will buy. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to talking about this government's agenda in the lead-up to the 2015 election, and I am sure that their arguments, certainly on this area, when it comes to their foreign affairs agenda, won't pass muster with Canadians. Thank you.
Questions and comments, Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think any of us on this side have ever heard a speech by the NDP opposing an arms control measure with such